All right, work item sync, 24th of August, at least here anyway. Cool. That's the first item. It's a long one, but I'll try and stick to the script. So I want to advocate for the uh, position that we would finish the requirements to work items work that we're currently engaged in on the back end. Whether or not like it's the right like product decision, I think that like what I've noticed over the last couple of weeks is that a lot of the rapid actions that we're taking are a result of things within and without our stage that have been, not completely finished for one reason or another. And I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but it is nevertheless a fact that some of these are unfinished work from the past. And I think we should kind of learn from these things. And however painful it is, like stick to the requirements migration that we've already started. So I've listed out a couple of possible outcomes if we were to switch away from this work, and I don't love any of them, to be completely honest. Whatever way we stop, we leave technical debt in there. Now, to put perspective around this, like one of the things that we've been cleaning up over the last week is subtransactions. And a large part of that came from the user mentions work that Alex did last year. That wasn't a problem at the time, but of course, things move on and things scale up and they become a problem. And I'm worried that like if we switch off of requirements to work items now, we'll leave syncing code in the code base that is fine now. Like, I mean, it's not fine because it doesn't do anything useful, but it's not a scalability issue now, but it is more likely to become a scalability issue before we get back to actually working on this work, if history is any kind of a teacher for us. So yeah, first of all, any questions from product and any perspectives that I'm missing? And second of all, we're in a 3-month headcount reset. I have 3 on my team that I can dedicate to work. Where should we be putting them? Is it 50-50 reliability product work? Do you see something different? Yeah, so please hit me with any questions or perspectives.
I think Alexis has the first point.
Yeah. I was kind of scared of that deleting requirements and issues associated with it thing, but we could talk about that later.
Yeah, so what that is not doing anything yet. That's just a sensible way to order this work. We know that we need to sync the 2 different things. So for a while, right? We need to have like requirements as an object on their own and requirements as a work item type. And for a period of time, we need to keep them in sync. And the kind of pretty clever thing on Charlie's part is to do the deletion first because it won't delete anything, right? Because nothing exists yet. And then you do the creation sync, because once you do the creation sync, now you have things to actually delete and you keep the 2 things in sync that way, rather than merge the creation sync first and then have a period of time where you're creating an item that you're not deleting, right? So in other words, like if I create a requirement, it's going to also create a requirement work item type. But if I delete that requirement, it won't delete that work item type. And so like it makes more sense to merge the deletion code first, because it won't do anything until you start merging that. So it maybe looks a little scarier than it is. Nevertheless, like this is a classic example of something that looks completely innocuous, but in the future, like it causes confusion for others, because if we stop now, it's like, why is that code in there? People can't reason about it. They see it, but they have to go through issues to find context. Maybe they never find that context. So it's scary from that point of view.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like all the context is kind of nested and nested and nested. I guess, yeah, okay. That was my first question. Then I did have the second question that's probably more important. But yeah, we mentioned like, making it modular. Like, what does that mean in terms of requirements? Can requirements be thought of as like any object in the future? Is it going to be flexible in that way? So like any work done now we can reapply to other items is kind of what I'm thinking. Would that be possible? The question also here, so go ahead.
So maybe I misunderstood the question originally then. the work that's going on here is just to move requirements to a work item type. Eventually, we'll have to do this for everything that's going to be a work item type in the future that doesn't already exist, right? Or that does already exist, sorry. So epics will have to be migrated as well, but they'll be like so much more complex because they have so many more features, but they also have features that don't exist on issues yet, such as hierarchies. So the reason for starting with requirements was they were the lowest risk. And if they're the lowest risk, we have the most chance to do them in a time frame that we can predict, and then we can learn from that and apply that to epics while solving the additional problems that epics bring. Like, you also have to migrate start and end dates, which you also have to like maybe, and you have to think about hierarchies in the future. You also have the problem that epics are at the group level and issues are currently at the project level. So yeah, so they're a little more complex. So we chose an item that was, maybe lower value, but simpler and less risky.
Yeah, that was kind of in a way, what I was asking. So that makes sense. So like whatever we do here, we could apply that to the other items. Those items are just more complex. So we would have to still have some learnings, but we would learn a lot from this work is the intention, right? Yeah.
Yeah, with each item we migrate, we're going to have new challenges. But it makes sense to do like the lowest common denominator first, which is requirements, because they're just basic objects like title, description. They have one extra little piece of functionality that can be roughly mapped to something that already exists on issues, which is the satisfied state, and I think they can be archived instead of closed. But these are all things that could be roughly mapped quite easily. They're not things like hierarchy, which requires you to not only implement that, but then also think about how to query it. Like how do I query deep into this new hierarchy, which are really just a hierarchy of issues. Like, so yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'll hand it over to the product folk. Mark and Melissa are commenting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember when we talked about this originally, and to answer Melissa's question real quick, because it kind of applies to me. Yes, we were planning on migrating requirements to issue types back in the day because we wanted to be able to link them to test cases, which were also an issue type. So we did the requirement work, then we did the test case work and realized we should have gone with an issue type potentially for requirements. So the intent was to migrate requirements to an issue type to prepare for the idea of a future option to have them all synchronized, which we've now come to understand as work items. I remember having conversations back a year ago saying if we couldn't figure out how to migrate requirements, then we're never going to figure out how to migrate epics because requirements are so much simpler. And the idea was we've got to learn how to do this at some point. And if we can't figure it out for requirements, then we're going to have a real struggle for everything else. So, hey, let's pick the easiest thing. There were less users, there's less risk. If we somehow manage to delete all the requirements or screw them up royally, it'd be a much simpler job to rebuild and try to sort that out because there's just so many less of them. Now, as we move forward, there are now more than there used to be, but still not nearly as many as there are epics and issues. So that's sort of the idea behind it. And I'm fine with getting rid of the archive versus close. I think I mentioned Charlie, if we can't carry that functionality over and we just now have open and close requirements, that's fine. Like, but the main point was to get them over to at the point issue type now work item.
Okay, so just to summarize to make sure I understood that correctly, it sounds like this requirements migration has been underway for a while, right? Before we all started talking about, hey, what if there's this reusable thing called work items? And before we introduced the concept of a feature instead of epic, this work has been happening in the background this whole time.
It was going to, it was scheduled, yeah.
Okay.
We actually delayed it.
It has been. I haven't been looped
start
in.
to work.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
It's on my team's roadmap, but like that part of it wasn't clear to me the whole way through. That like the 30% towards the certified team and how that was playing out in terms of my roadmap wasn't clear until just in the last week or two. of how much had to go under requirements versus features.
If I could just like, we've been working on extensible issues or issue types for over a year. So like, that's where, like we finally got everyone aligned around work items and we decided to prioritize feature, which is great. But like, when I look at this, it's sort of like migrating requirements is a really natural progression to feature anyways, because we have to do the work items table effort for feature, right? We have to start the new view app, which we want to have with title, description, and assignee for MVC1, right? And so the only additional work we would need to do other than the actual migration was the test reports widget, which is fairly straightforward and something we should be able to do. And then like you have parity with what is existing requirements and they're migrated. And it's like, to me, it's sort of like a really natural progression towards the feature MVCs that we have planned out already. So I don't know if that's like realistic or not, but we can then continue to develop the rest of the feature and all the other widgets behind a feature flag, but we can also release and finish the requirements migration work. So it's not tech debt or proc debt or just like basically value in terms of unfinished inventory that's sitting on the shelf for a long time.
My concern would be that
I
it's
could get
already tech debt at that stage. Like if we stop now, like basically because I'll already have to do a handover between Charlie and Felipe. Felipe will have to take over the MR that Charlie has in progress, probably like if it doesn't get merged by the end of this week. Nevertheless, there'll have to be a handover there anyway. If we close that MR, we'll basically like lose the knowledge anyway. Somebody else will have to ramp up, or Charlie, when she comes back from headcount reset, will have to ramp back up. We'll lose all that progress. And we'd still have this code in the code base. It's at that point technical debt, and we can say we'll come back to it, but I don't know. History doesn't really say that we will. I mean, maybe we will, but like planning anything more than 3 months out, especially in a company that's like agile like this, is as good as I guess not planning to come back to it. So my concern would be like, if we do that, I don't see why we can't do both, by the way, like because the project management team currently are working on parts of this, we would just continue migrating requirements to issue types. It's going to take a few milestones anyway, because we have to leave the sync code in place for, I believe, a milestone in order to satisfy the multi-version compatibility requirement. So I think we could do them in parallel,
How much time? I think I have that in 3.1. Like, what is the time frame we're talking to do that migration? I think you just said 3 milestones. And do we feel okay still? Like the reason why we were saying greenfield was so that we could do it without an impact to customers initially, because they weren't relying on those URLs or those the issue IDs essentially in their current workflow. Like, do we still feel okay with that? Could we go out with a front end work item front end on the new back end?
I think that actually we were planning to just ghost this through the API and not worry about the front end at all. And even then, that's like, you could argue that's kind of tech debt. But we were okay with it, like, because just we reached consensus, I think, that was where we wanted to go with it, and that was a natural breakpoint. The question of like how long it's going to take has just radically changed for me. So it's kind of depends on that last question that I put in there as well. Like, where do you see our capacity going over the next 3 milestones, while 2 members of the team, or 2/5 of the team, if you like, are part of a headcount reset, one of which was the main driver of, like, if you like, the linearly stacked piece of part of this work. So we were going to get these 3, we were going to get these first MRs out of the way. That was all dependent work. And then I was going to spread it out amongst the team that we could maybe get this completed in a couple of milestones, with the only requirement being that we would have to cross a milestone barrier to satisfy the requirement that self-hosting customers have a compatible release. But like, it goes back, basically compatibility is guaranteed 1 release back, right? Does that make sense? So if you kind of, we guarantee that one minor release is stable. If you jump multiple minor releases, we don't guarantee that. So we would have to cross a milestone barrier anyway. Now 2 of the team are part of the reset, including one member of the team who was primarily working on it. Another member of the team was heavily involved in the design of it. And so there's a handover. So it really depends on how much capacity we have to give to it. On the other hand, what are we doing with this reset but trying to help, trying to pay down technical debt that we've left in the past? So you could make the argument that we're avoiding long-term reliability problems in the future by completing this work now, and maybe you could make the argument that we count it into the reliability work that we're doing as well. I don't know. That's not my choice though.
What if we did just take 3 months for that work, plus you're saying, yeah, like the reliability work, and we'll just have like a full roadmap of all of that, then start features.
Well, the other thing to clarify, John, and I guess this is important for what Chris is going with this, the 3 months, I thought, I mean, my understanding, and I realize a lot is shifting right now, so it's probably really hard to get a very tight time frame. I really thought it was less than 3 months worth of effort, but we had to maintain that over the course of a release. So it was more like a couple milestones of effort, but we had to keep a issue open across a release boundary, which would just be to clean up the code. So the last chunk, there might be a delay there where we can't do the work because we have to wait for a release to ship. And then we'll go back in and clean a couple things up so that we've satisfied that compatibility. That's a much smaller effort to remove that, was my understanding, than it was to put all that stuff in place. So I don't think it's 3 months exclusive work or whatever the time frame ends up being once we figure out the headcount reset. I think it was some upfront work, a pause to let a release go out, and then back end work to pull it back out. Not that changes a lot. I just want to make sure it's clear that it's not like 3 solid months of like everybody going full bore to get this done, or however long we end up being with the headcount reset. I realize that much.
Right. Yeah. There should be no visible difference, I guess, for users for the most part.
Right.
But the point at which you would say like, there's no further risk to the work and we're simply removing stuff, yeah, that will come sooner than what I see as the whole span required to do this work, if that makes sense. Because there is a section at the end where we have to like, we've had the syncing going on for a while, then we do the migration of existing requirements, we migrate over, and then we clear out the stuff that we left behind. But that part at the end doesn't really, like, it has to be done, but it's kind of removing stuff that's no longer being used. So yeah, you could say that we're done at the end of that, but we're like done with the risk like before that.
Could we get that translated over into the main level Epic? I can see there's a lot of requirements, linking test cases is in there now, but just the plan of attack so we can update sort of the summary and make sure that that's clear that we're all on the same page for amount of time, and then the order of operations for requirements and how that rolls into features.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll do that after the call.
Okay. John, as per your question about capacity, right, and how much we allocate to reliability, the main way that we're measuring that is through error budgets, right? So if our error budgets are green, right, and we don't know of any outstanding technical debt work, I think it's good to dedicate it to work items because that in itself is technical debt in a way. I looked at product planning and that looked okay. So I think from that perspective, if there's nothing big with project management, when I looked, projects was the biggest offender as far as, you know, affecting our budgets. So hopefully we get that transition to the workspaces team, and I'm curious what our budgets look like after that, because that is what will determine how much we need to set aside to work on as far as reliability goes.
So
now, Melissa, I know this has been said before, and I think this is what John's going to jump in and say. The certified error budget looks great, but it's not actually measuring anything.
Actually, so a couple of points. The AppDex requirement was raised to 5 seconds, I believe, this morning, but it might have been yesterday. Maybe I missed it. I don't know. that in itself, I think, completely mended the product planning error budget. So it looks green now. It might not have been yesterday or on Friday. The second thing is Certify went red. And that's because a job that was failing, the process requirements job, was previously not counted in the error budget now is. I'm not sure why. I didn't look too far into it. So yeah, a lot's changing in error budgets. But look, we know why the product planning error budget was low in the first place. And the main reason, I guess, was well, there were two: discussions being slow, which is true of all stages that use discussions, or all groups, and we had a lot of 500s, I suppose, relative to certain things. We've already been tackling some of those, and they're very, very small, very simple issues. So, you know, okay, it's green now. Like, that's possibly because of the apdex change. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, to be honest. It doesn't mean that things are any less serious, though.
Right. Do we have the fix-in for the GraphQL stuff? Because I know that's why the Giddily one was, or sorry, the Certified one was kind of a mess to start with. Because, and John knows the technical reasons behind it, but basically because we went full GraphQL on requirements when we initially made them, a lot of the stuff isn't tracked correctly. There's no way to get a lot of the summary, my understanding, for the error budget to GraphQL. And that's something that I know is in progress. I don't know where that is, who owns that. So the certified error budget is artificially low because of that. Now, it sounds like it's gone red for other reasons, but just as an FYI, the certified error budget is not really the best place to look for reliable issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the simplest way I could describe it would be like if you go through the REST API and you want to list your requirements, if we had a REST API for those, it would be very simple for us to track that request. It's a request to the endpoint that lists requirements. The problem with the GraphQL API is that it's completely permissive. It lets you do anything pretty much. So it's an object graph. And you could ask for, give me all requirements associated with this thing and only return the name of the requirement, or only return the state. The point is the number of possibilities are so huge that we can't possibly track that amount of cardinality. And so we're doing like little hacks and stuff by tracking the operation name and things like that in Kibana, but it's nothing that we can put in our Grafana charts yet. But there is some kind of solution ongoing to figure that out. I'm just not across it.
Okay. Are there issues that track these, can y'all link them?
Yeah, I can find it. There's
Okay.
one pretty big one hanging around somewhere. I'll look into it.
Okay, Gabe, you had one, I think, right after.
I was just answering the question. I think it's going to change it quite a bit. Top 5 most offensive endpoints or requests all have to do with projects. I'm not sure what the root controller is. I think it has to do with projects too. Maybe not. But right now the error budget's at 99.58, which is way higher than it's been in the past. I think a couple weeks ago it was like at 98.3 or something absurd. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what's happening. And then we're already working on basically issue search, or what will be the future work item search, because that's the other area we're actually having real customer problems and impact, because they can't search issue lists or boards in a performant way without timing out at scale. So Heinrich's working on that as we speak. But it's gonna, basically there's no simple fix. So yeah, we'll see how far we get. But that's the other biggest thing I think that would probably have an impact on error budgets, would be the actual errors from 500s from the issue list. So
Cool.
So I would
talk.
say, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. Just to
Go ahead.
summarize this, I think it sounds like we still need to dedicate capacity to reliability, like in instrumentation for certified, in the issues that we know of, like search and discussions, right? So I think continuing to focus on that makes sense. And I think it means that we have to focus on requirements and SaaS reliability, but I'll defer to engineering to let us know like how much capacity we have and if there's anything left after working on these two things.
I think for Certify, we could just focus on requirements process worker at the minute. That seems to be the main source of our error budget spend. It is a fudge because we don't know how slow or fast GraphQL is, but we should just, I think for now, treat that as an unknown and fix the thing we can see. And it's just one thing.
Kristen, I was going to say, I think I want to talk about like ideation around requirements, but I think we can just move on to 3 right now in our like 2 seconds left because I think it's more important.
Sure, thank you. And maybe we could do yours offline here as well. This we may not know, but I noticed, or it was said that the move from, or to bring projects and groups together, we would reduce 30% of our code base when those two come together. Could we get a number like that on epics getting onto work items as well as requirements, either in number of files, percentage of code base, number of lines of code, something where we could at least say this effort that we're going to do from an engineering standpoint is going to participate this much in completing or getting rid of some tech debt and overhead. I'm going to do it in terms of backlog percentage and all these issues and epics I'll be able to close on when we have work items. But that's just a question I'm throwing out there. If anyone knows that number offhand or could get it.
I think we could estimate it. I'm not sure it's I'm not sure it's that useful a number. Like it might be deceptively like not useful, like it might appear useful, but
like really small. Like
well, it's not that
there's 2 files.
It's not that it would be small. It's just that like, is maintaining one work item finder really easier than maintaining like an epics finder, an issue finder, and everything else? Like in some ways, yes, it is. In other ways, it's much harder because, you have to work with one thing that's much more complex. So like, I'm just saying that lines of code generally might be deceptive, but in answer to your question, could we estimate it? Yeah, we could estimate it probably with reasonable accuracy.
I mean,
We know
really
how frustrating it is. Like for epics to be not at the same level as issues, it's a constant customer concern because they don't have the same filter bars and all of the things they're expecting. So it definitely is an improvement if you think of it from the SUS or the user standpoint of the consistent, non-buggy feeling experience.
I think we just have to be careful though, because we've in the past said Slack is the driver. If you remove 30,000 lines of code, you've made your product better. And I think there's something to be noted here and taken out of more regulated industries, that what you're shooting for is not low Slack. You're shooting for a low complexity value. That has always been the path forward for reliability. So it's a misunderstanding to state that reducing Slack reduces complexity and increases reliability. It's generally the opposite is true. Reducing complexity increases reliability, but decreasing complexity oftentimes requires adding code.
Well, I'm talking about duplicated code, duplicated efforts.
It doesn't matter. It's the
I
same
understand
thing.
what you're saying. Like,
yeah, there's many studies done on it. I can point you to some in the aerospace industry. We did this. This was like a huge multi-year thing we worked with NASA on in an IR&D sense. But yeah, reducing complexity is the key, not reducing code base.
I think the essence of what Kristen is bringing up is important, though, that especially in today, right, like where we are as a company and that we're saying we're attacking tech debt and complexity and making our code base more sustainable, it is important to find a way to quantify how work items contributes to that.
Great.
And that will help in messaging, right, and in a way like justifying why we want to work on this when as a group, as a product group, we're saying tech debt's the most important thing. So however we want to do that,
complexity.
maybe, yeah, maybe lines of code isn't the best way, right? but if we have some quantifiable, concrete way of speaking about that and all of us using that same metric, whatever it is, I think it will go a long way.
Yeah, and we can, I mean, I'm happy to talk about this ad nauseum. I've done this for years, but yeah, code complexity is the way forward on that. If you want to talk, and I think most like engineering would agree, if we can show that our code complexity numbers are decreasing because of changes we're making, and that could be breaking up functions into multiple smaller pieces that are easier to maintain. There's hundreds of ways to do that across the board. The problem is oftentimes complexity and reduction in complexity increases time. Reduction in time or increases in efficiency reduce your complexity. So it's this balancing act you have to come to as a company. And it's hard to translate that to senior levels because oftentimes they see it as one or the other. And the reality is it's a balance of the two. If you want performant code, you have to increase complexity oftentimes. And where do you draw the line between an increase in complexity gives you more performance versus increasing complexity to the point where your maintainability goes down? It's a very difficult situation. But I agree, quantifying it makes sense. We just want to quantify it using the right metrics.
Yeah, and I agree. If we're going to put effort into something, like we should be able to measure the outcome. Like, and I know in the front end they have this like concept of tree shaking for CSS, so they can see which CSS classes never get called, and then they can just remove those. I'm not sure we have anything comparable on the back end, but it'd be really nice to see like what's in our code base that never is in the critical code path. Like, can we just get rid of it then? Like, if it's never used. I don't know if we have tools for that. It would be hard to estimate, but it would certainly be, you can quite easily these days measure cyclomatic complexity and things like that. We have the tools for it. Just can't really estimate it. Like, I mean, I wouldn't know where to start saying how could we reduce that? Like, I mean, I know how we could reduce it, just not how we could estimate how much we would remove. Yeah.
Just for
I know.
curiosity in this conversation too, like whether or not we say a number like that, for me to just know, hey, we're going to remove like this whole epic folder in the code base, but we're going to have to add this much complexity into the main controller or whatever because of that. So it's not necessarily, it might be a trade-off situation, but I just would like to be sort of aware of what those are, like the amounts and the complexity added.
I think we're over time, so maybe this can be a homework assignment for each of us to think of a way that we would like to measure this. I think, Kristen, your idea to measure the backlog reduction is really good. And maybe there's other ways in which we can measure the engineering side of things.
I'll ask the members of my team as well if they have any ideas or if they've seen anything. It's quite an interesting problem. But I do agree with the principle, Kristen, like we should measure it if we're going to work against it.
Mm-hmm. Customers love those numbers if we can tell them something that makes sense to them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's call it there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.